there's unfortunately only so much you can do to protect physical infrastructure, in particular fixed infrastructure that are large footprint, older designs from kinetic strikes without sufficient air defense systems, and that's why I've been asked a lot about how do we protect. What is the I've kind of asked, what's the energy security strategy for Ukraine ever since the large scale invasion happened? And I would say right away, air defense, right? And people are asking me that thinking I'm going to come up with some energy for energy policy, right? You have an energy issue, you're going to have an energy policy solution. But the truth of the matter is the cheapest way that we can support the resiliency of Ukraine's energy infrastructure is giving them more air defense systems, giving them more Patriots, giving them more HIMARS, supporting the transfer of F-16s to protect energy infrastructure. Because it's one thing when you had as Russia was ramping up its strikes against Ukraine in 2022, you have attacks on smaller infrastructure, power lines, and in substations through the electrical grid and things like this. All civilian infrastructure, I might add. This is all aimed at exacerbating a tragic humanitarian crisis, with, I believe, the hope on the Kremlin side that the Ukrainian people would just get fed up with the energy intermittency or energy poverty that's being created, and as a result, reduce their support for pushing back on Kremlin aggression and continuing the war to defend their nation. And of course, this has failed. The Ukrainian people are standing resolute as they are and have been heroically doing since the start of this large-scale conflict. But that has changed because those sort of systems are in some ways modular. A lot of those can be, we've seen energy operators in Ukraine right after strikes going out and fixing these as quickly as possible and doing a heroic job to restore power for the general population, civilian population of Ukraine. But now we're seeing in the past weeks strikes on thermal power plants and larger power plants, things that can't be rebuilt or swapped out or found on the global market quickly and brought to Ukraine to plug in. And so the lack of modularity of those systems that are being destroyed now, that's really concerning, because it's going to create energy poverty for a long time. And so for anyone that says, well, we have to focus at some point on how do we rebuild these systems, defend them now. Give the systems to Ukraine now that they need to defend their skies, so that these don't get struck as much, or hopefully at all, if you give the right type of systems in the right quantities. Right? This notion that we're going to be rebuilding and having these rebuilding summits for Ukrainian energy, that's all well and good, but we have a military solution right now that we can send more air defense to put around these facilities, and you're going to save billions and billions of dollars, not only of the military cost, but the ultimate cost that we have is the West to help Ukraine stabilize itself in the future. So this notion that energy officials often look for energy solutions, and that's only natural. But again, these are multidisciplinary issues that you need to go cross discipline to figure out the best way, the best economic way of getting around these issues for an energy security solution, which is not just, as I said, the Bloomberg terminal approach or the economics forward approach. It's a hard security question that has a hard security answer. And Ukraine has answered a lot of this, and we have a lot of lessons, I'm sure, that will come out. I know a lot of this is very sensitive right now, and the Ukrainians don't very rightfully so, don't want to release this information publicly to say what they're doing to protect their infrastructure. But I think in the future, as things, as Ukraine continues hopefully to push back Russian aggression, more of these strategies will help Western governments better protect their infrastructure from what is the harshest possible physical infrastructure attack set, which is, of course, kinetic strikes from military systems. More air defense systems around critical infrastructure is certainly part of the solution. You can't infinitely build spare parts and effectively spare full power plants for your entire grid. It's just not an economic solution. You can give some level of resiliency with mobile power plants and things like this to patch patch things up in a military conflict, but you really need to make sure that the defense systems are your frontline defenders against energy infrastructure attacks. And so you say, you're talking about this hypothetical future in which I assume we're talking about a large-scale conflict between NATO and the Russian Federation and what we would do to protect infrastructure in that case. Look, I'm much more concerned right now, again, with all of the infrastructure that is being damaged and has really only been damaged in this scale and this scope since the start of Russia's large-scale invasion of Ukraine. And I think there's no coincidence in a lot of these cases that has been going on. And look, you yourself, I saw in a classic appearance on France 24 talking about the Nord Stream blasts, where the moderator on the program basically just basically said that it's certainly true that the Ukrainians were behind this in this small pro-Ukrainian sailboat going out and blowing up 3 of the 4 trunk lines of Nord Stream 1 and 2. It's interesting that a lot of the media has intentionally or unintentionally, whatever it may be, but ignored the fact that there were many in both June of 2022 and in the days just 2 days before the attacks on Nord Stream, there were Russian intelligence vessels that have subsea warfare capabilities that were above the exact blast sites that they turned out to have taken place at. So unless this is kind of like Minority Report, where remember the film with Tom Cruise where they could predict where and when future crimes would take place, I don't think that it's really reasonable to say that the Russians, as I've heard some in Berlin say, that were out there to quote unquote protect the pipeline. They knew exactly where the strike was going to take place. No, I mean, you have to look at the capabilities. Is it literally impossible that a sailboat couldn't be used as a platform for this? No, I can't completely rule that out, but you have to balance that with the capabilities that the Russians actually had on site and were shown again by a pan-Nordic investigation to have been on site, which are satellite images of Russian, military subsea warfare vessels. And so that's very interesting. The other thing I saw, Sergey, when I was in Berlin, quite a few people, whether I was talking to them in Mecklenburg-Vorpommern or in Berlin, et cetera, they would instinctively say that they dismiss both the Ukrainian and the Russian quote unquote theories of who may have been behind it, and immediately said, when I said, well, who do you think blew up Nord Stream 2? And they said, well, of course, your country, meaning the United States. And in some cases, this really, has been debunked many times over. It's not in the interest of the United States to order a clandestine kinetic strike against this infrastructure, one that Germany was relying on. And this is the Biden administration who didn't even want to sanction Nord Stream 2, in the months before this. So no way that happened. But, you have Russia operationalizing disinformation in and around these sort of infrastructure attacks. The same thing goes for Baltic Connector, where there is a Chinese flagged vessel, the new Polar Bear, that was shown to have dragged its anchor through these cables and the Baltic Connector pipeline. Yes, for it was Chinese flagged. It's Hong Kong flagged. However, this was only Chinese flagged for about 6 weeks before the incident took place. And what's more, the vessel had stopped in Kaliningrad. There were reports that there may have been a crew swap to a Russian crew. And then this whole thing, this vessel was escorted by the Sevmorput, which is a Russian nuclear-powered Arctic-class icebreaker, through this entire location. I've talked to ship captains and subsea experts and things like this, and the idea that this was a complete accident where you would drop an anchor to the seabed and then continue at full speed at between 9 and 12 knots for 250 nautical miles. Come on. I mean, this is really difficult to understand. And whereas, again, it's very hard to conclude who is behind it. And, this report that I'll have coming out soon is going to take a lot of these aspects into account. it's something that federal governments should be looking into further, in understanding that this is part of our critical infrastructure protection package, but also, attribution is key to deterring these sort of incidents in the future. And the fact that none of these incidents that I've mentioned on this podcast have been attributed at all by any national authority is concerning, right? And either it shows a recognition that attribution may cause escalation if it turns out to be one actor or another, or if it means that there's no ability to attribute because of the lack of evidence. Both of those outcomes mean we need to do more. We need to do our homework and make sure that that state actors and non-state actors cannot weaponize our own infrastructure against us. When we look at renewables, that's kind of the the horizontal challenge of how do we protect renewables. The gut feel is to say that this is much safer than old pipelines, hydrocarbon infrastructure, and things like this. And to an extent, that's true, right? If you build an offshore wind farm, Sergey, and it's got, let's say, 1,000 windmills, it's going to be very difficult for a small sabotage group, whether it's a terrorist group, non-state actor, or it's a state actor, and operating, someone, for example, like our friends over in the Russian Naval Mission Directorate, Subsea Directorate, GUGI, for example. It's going to be difficult to take out all of 1,000 of these. However, there are still choke points in the systems where at the end of the day, you're going to have transmission cables, electricity cables that are going to be sending that electricity to the shore. And so you're going to have kind of the same pathology as you do with electricity interconnectors in the offshore right now, or pipelines right now. And that's not an argument not to do these systems. In fact, we have to, if we want to address the climate crisis and get through the energy transition. What I mean is a lot of the energy transition has not yet considered, I think, the concerns about physical security of energy infrastructure. There's been a lot of focus over the past 15 to 20 years on cybersecurity and cyber attacks on these sort of infrastructure, and indeed we continue to have issues with that. We saw even last week a water system in Texas be attacked by a Russian hacking group, causing some water facilities to overflow, and that's terrifying when you really think about it, right? That's critical infrastructure for populations that is a major concern, and so we certainly don't want to overlook the cyber side of things. But I think that in this era, we thought that the idea of physical attacks on these systems, especially from state actors, someone like Russia, was unthinkable, because why would you bother doing something like that if you can easily, with a few swipes of your fingers, mount a cyber attack against energy infrastructure or other critical infrastructure? And so that's why I think that we really have had a wake-up call between the Tromsø to Svalbard Svalsat fiber optic cable system attack in 2022, start of 2022, the Nord Stream attacks, the Baltic Connector attacks, all of these sort of things that have been going on have been wake-up calls that we really have to get back to basics and understand, counter sabotage and counter physical attack pathologies to how we actually respond to these, because this has unfortunately not gone away in the era that we're in right now. In fact, I think it's only become more ubiquitous and becoming more ubiquitous, and it's not been unfortunately thrown away in the dustbin of history from the World War I and World War II sabotage era. So I think that we really need to keep this and keep physical security of energy infrastructure at the front of mind, because we'll never get through the energy transition and build the systems we need and have the political will to get through this if there continue to be cyber attacks, but in particular if there continue to be physical attacks on energy infrastructure that undermines the electorate's support for the measures that are needed to build out infrastructure that gets us from hydrocarbons to a renewable energy future, because they just will see, well, guess what? You're building this infrastructure and it can't be protected, so let's just stay with the status quo, and that's dangerous as well. And I think that there's too many in the area of climate that are unfortunately just not focused on the physical and national security impacts of a lot of what is being proposed. And it's not that they're against it. I think they just need to integrate this, keep integrating these sort of strategies into the broader climate playbook. When I was out on Bornholm as a part of my research project investigating part of the Nord Stream blasts last year, I saw in some farmers' fields there were painted signs against this proposed renewable energy island that is going to be built basically in the offshore near Bornholm in Danish waters, with the justification, at least in terms of the protest signs, that Nord Stream was blown up, right? And so this juxtaposition that a hydrocarbon pipeline that was leaking all this methane is reducing the will of folks to have faith in their authorities, have faith in their governments to build the renewable energy infrastructure we need for the Energiewende. That's really concerning as well. And we need to make sure that these national security and foreign policy strategies are front and center in whatever energy playbook we end up with.